Hello everyone, my name is Rajesh Chatterjee, and this video we're going to talk about something called test class, right? And you as a developer, if you're writing Apex code every day, you have to know what is test class, what is the importance of test class, and why do you write test class, right? And few best practices that we have to follow as a developer whenever we write a test class. So what is the story behind test class? Like normally, we as a developer, we are putting so much of effort to write the Apex code, and on top of it, right, we again have to write the test classes, which is again a piece of Apex code. And what is the need of this, right? Let's understand that. So I'm assuming that you guys know what is sandbox, what is production, and how to do the deployment and all. If you do not know, just watch the other video where we have explained properly the sandbox and the production part. So normally what happened for a development, you as a developer, you write your code, you do the functionalities, you build the functionality of the application in a sandbox environment. That's your development environment, right? And once that development is done, once your QA team has done with the testing, once they give a green signal, you as a developer, when you are done with the development, right, you have to migrate that metadata. When I say metadata, those are basically your Apex classes, your pages, your LWC components, your object fields and everything. You have to migrate those things from your sandbox environment to your productions. And guess what? Whenever you try to deploy that metadata from one environment to another environment, especially from sandbox to production, right? Production is the environment where your business user will go and use it. You have to cover each and every Apex code that you have written. Could be your Apex class or trigger, whatever. You have to cover it up, and to cover it up, you have to write Apex test classes. Okay, so the concept behind the test class is basically Salesforce is a cloud platform, right? It's not something that you have installed in your system, right? It's a cloud platform, and you as a developer has to make sure that you maintain certain things when you write code, right? Because of your code, maybe let's say you're trying to manipulate or maybe update billions of record at a time, right? And because of your code, the server might break, and other tenants, like other developers, whoever is using the same server, might get affected, right? So Salesforce as a system had made sure that you as a developer, when you develop an Apex class, you also write a test class. It's basically a script which will be running in the backend to check whatever Apex code you have written, right? Is it making sense, right? Is there anything that should not be there, right? So all this checking system will do from its backend, and for that you as a developer have to write that piece of code, and that is called test classes. Now let's understand the coverage part. Okay, so when you write a test class, right, the very first thing is, let's say for an example, hypothetically you have a Apex class where you have 100 lines of code, 100, right? And test class basically do not count your bracket that you start or system.debug that you have written, right? Apart from those things, suppose like you have written solid 100 lines of code. To deploy that 100 lines of code into your production, you have to write a test class which will go each and every line of your 100 lines of code and cover at least 75 lines from it. What do you mean by cover? Cover means the Apex test class that you have written, it should go and check your Apex class code one by one. I'll show you how to do it, okay? And when you see this as a practical, you understand more. But theoretically, your Apex test class will be running in the backend, and will go to your Apex class to check each and every line one by one. And in order to deploy your Apex code from your sandbox inside your production, you have to make sure that at least 75 lines out of this 100 line has been covered. Getting me, right? So this is one point. Your Apex class needs to be covered 75%. And how you're calculating this percent? Based on that same thing that I've given, right? If you have 100 lines of code, at least 75 lines has to be covered by your test class. That is what called 75% coverage for your particular Apex class. Okay. So individually, every class has to have 75% of coverage. You got this calculation, right? Let's understand something called overall coverage. So this is what I was talking about, the code coverage. See this particular line, right? There's a Apex class called fetch account. This is a normal, very 2 lines of code, like very simple code. This Apex class has total how many lines, right? Total 8 lines. But remember, I told you, right? Salesforce doesn't count your brackets and system.debugs and everything. So basically, you have total 3 lines of code. One is line number 6, line number 5, and this method that you have declared. So total 3 lines of code that you have in this Apex class. Now the test class that you will be writing, no, if 75% of this 3 line, maybe like 2 lines, if you cover 2 lines of it, of this 3 lines of code, right, 3 lines of fx class, then it should be more than 75%. Getting right? So in case if this fx class has total 10 lines of code, and out of 10 your test class is covering 7 lines of code, you get 70%. Okay, so this is what called individual code coverage. Let me show you now what is called overall code coverage. Okay, let me just go back to my Apex classes. If you go to your setup and search for Apex class, you'll see all your Apex classes over here. Do you read something here called percentage of Apex use 0.97%? And if you click on this, estimate your organization code coverage. If you click on this, what happens? Suppose you have 10 Apex classes. Each Apex classes has 100 lines of code. Total how many lines of code you have? 1000. And you have suppose 10 separate test classes that you have written for each and every Apex classes. When you run, there's a button called run all test. You see here, right? This button, if you click, what happens? Your all 10 test classes will be running in the backend, and it will try to give coverage each and every individual Apex classes. For an example, let's say total 1000 lines of code you have in this all 10 different Apex classes, and each and individual test classes is trying to giving cover to this individual Apex classes. So for an example, let's say out of 1000, 700 line has been covered. 700 line has been covered by your test classes. Then your overall code coverage should be 70%. When you click on this run all test, right, and try to compile all the classes, you'll see your overall coverage is 70%. So two percentage that you have to be mindful. One, every single class should have 75% of coverage, right? That's when you will be able to deploy that class into your production. Second thing is, if you have overall 1000 lines of code, you have to make sure that with your test classes, at least 75 means like 750 line has been covered by these test classes. If that happens, then your overall code coverage is 75%, right? And this test class or overall code coverage, you have to calculate, you have to be mindful in only production, not in sandbox. So it doesn't matter in your sandbox how many lines of code you have, how much is the overall code coverage, but in your production, when you run all the test classes and try to cover the overall code coverage, it has to be more than 75. And trust me, like this is sometime sometime we have to go live in very urgently, right? And you have like 75% of coverage, and the class that you are deploying, the Apex class that you are deploying for your current release, suppose it has 1000 lines of code or 700 lines of code. What happened is, right, if you don't have a bandwidth, if your production doesn't have more than 75% of coverage, then all of a sudden when you deploy this 1000 lines of code, the overall code coverage will be reduced, and that would be a headache for you. So try to maintain at least 85-90% of overall code coverage in your Salesforce org, in a production org. That's when you'll have some bandwidth. So in case, let's say you have to go in rush, you have to deploy some Apex class in rush, and you don't have a time to write test classes, right? Even though that class has like 0% of coverage, if your production org has total 75% of coverage, you will be able to deploy that Apex class into productions. Right. So for that, you should have that bandwidth, the bandwidth in the sense your production org should have more than 75% of coverage. At least it should be like 85-90% of coverage. That's when you are perfectly fine to deploy any Apex class. Okay, so hope you understand what is test class and what is the coverage, how to calculate this percentage. And I'm going to create the next video. This video is going a little long, right? Next video, I'm going to write a Apex class, and I'm going to write a test class against that Apex class, and I'll show you how to write a test class and how this test class has been covering the Apex classes. Okay, so see you in the next video. Thank you.